Welcome to another edition of the Magic Ladies Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic podcasts here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And shout out to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring the podcast. Again, shout out to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring the pod. Let's go ahead and get right into today's episode. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It's going to be a relatively light week because the Orlando Magic don't play again until Thursday. Obviously, big game in Germany. Big game for the fellas, the Wagner Bros and Tristan da Silva specifically. And with that being the case, we're going to have a little bit more of an open-ended conversation over the next handful of episodes leading up to that first matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies later on this week. So first off, I just want to read some comments from the Wagner Bros in particular, and maybe Tristan da Silva's as well, in relation to their excitement heading into this game against the Memphis Grizzlies in Germany. So Franz said, yeah, I feel good. I've been working really hard the last couple of weeks to get back as soon as I can, and hopefully that'll be in Berlin. But regardless of it, if I play or not, it's going to be just a true full circle moment, I think, for me, for Mo and I, excuse me. You know, growing up, going as little kids to the gym to watch the pros play, and now bringing an NBA game there is pretty special for us. We're just going to try and enjoy every second of it, take it all in, and just appreciate the opportunity. To kind of add on to that, again, Tristan da Silva also said, obviously my family is going to be there. A couple of my friends are going to come up, and first and foremost, we're there to get a W. So we're kind of trying to string some wins together to get some in a row, something that we discussed heavily last episode. And yeah, we're excited. I think this is going to be a great experience for the team. So again, I think there's a little bit of a mini morale boost that could be set for the Orlando Magic with the way this week is. Let's go down to 3 keys to this mini morale boost for the Magic. A lot of M's. Number 1, you're off until Thursday. They do not play another game between now and Berlin. That's number 1. Number 2, you just got Mo Wagner back. You got Mo Wagner back, got 8 points in 9 minutes from him. Paired with the fact that between what Mosley has said and what Franz has said himself, there's a possibility that Franz Wagner will be back available by Thursday to maybe play even in a limited capacity. So, you have the break, which gives also Franz a little bit more time to get himself healthy before any other games are played. So you have the break. The Wagner Bros may both be back on the floor. And the sentimental value behind the Berlin game, both for the Wagner Bros, Tristan da Silva, but honestly, even for the Orlando Magic wanting to do it for those fans for the sake of the Wagner brothers and Tristan da Silva, right? You see your teammate, you see the excitement, you know their families are there, you know the importance, the magnitude of the situation, and you want to play for that guy next to you, that guy that all those things matter so much to. It's very similar like when you talk about the NBA in-season tournament, the NBA Cup. The money for a superstar that's won at the end may not equate in the value overall that it means to the guy at the end of the bench. But when you play with the guy at the end of the bench at the forefront of your mind for the why you're doing what you're doing, the how important this is, even if it's not within your household, what it could mean to someone else can carry so much weight. So the Magic have a break. More specifically, they have a break coming off of a win. They may be getting both of the Wagner brothers back just in time, paired with the fact that you also have Tristan da Silva in the mix for the family homecoming aspect, which is more of the emotional tie-in that kind of has this team heading into a bit of a euphoric situation. And I think that's very important for an Orlando Magic team like this. They're in a very unique situation. Because I genuinely believe that as this team gets healthier, the season is going to flip around on its head, and a lot of the worries that we have are going to significantly change just simply due to this roster getting back to full strength. But this week in particular allows all of those things to kind of culminate at once. Again, this Orlando Magic team needs to find themselves. They really need to figure out which version of the Orlando Magic they are. Are they the team that keeps losing in situations where it feels like they are no-brainers supposed to be, out front, a la the Washington Wizards game? Or are they the team we saw when they went 7-3 over a 10-game stretch, and it felt like the Orlando Magic were finally getting the ball back rolling after that big Portland Trailblazers win? Which Orlando Magic team is it? I think this week could give us a very strong indication of what the real Orlando Magic team truly looks like. And I think this little mini morale boost, although it may not seem like much, I think it's going to end up meaning a lot to this team. The rest is well needed for a team that feels like they are spiraling a little bit. The getting back healthy is huge for a team that desperately kind of needs to rekindle some of their depth. I mean, for Christ's sake, Wendell Carter Jr. didn't play last game against the New Orleans Pelicans. Like, this team continues to deal with injuries. Jace Richardson, who barely played very much this season, has played heavy minutes when he did finally get in the game. But Jace Richardson has been in and out of the lineup. He's dealing with a little bit of an ankle situation. Like, this team is ravaged by injuries. So a chance to finally just sit down and get healthy is huge for this team. So I always talk about the inflection point, or one of the inflection points for this Orlando Magic season, being the Desmond Bane shot earlier on in the year. I think this is going to be another one of those much needed inflection points for the Orlando Magic as far as the growth system for all of these players. Still very, very young guys. I think this could be a really, really big deal. Next up, you can see it. You see what it says. Noah Pinto over Jonathan Isaac. Noah Pinto over Jonathan Isaac. Some of you in the comment section are starting to come around to the Jalon school of thought that money and minutes don't coexist. Right? Money and minutes don't coexist. And with that being the case, you have to separate how much a guy is getting paid from how much he is genuinely worth. His minutes, Jonathan Isaac, reflect a player who is not worth $15 million. Now, are there things that Jonathan Isaac does bring to the table? Yes, there's a leadership aspect. There's the fact that he's like one of the only veterans on the team. Sure. But for $14 to $15 million, does the productivity equate to him still being a valuable asset on this team? And that's what I mean by minutes, because I know that in certain instances, you can look at the Tyus Jones example, for example, and say, oh, he's a veteran point guard. That's why Mosley keeps throwing him minutes, despite the fact that he probably doesn't deserve them. Yes, the money doesn't say, because he's only making $7 million this year and he's on a 1-year contract. The money may not suggest that he deserves all these minutes, but his veteranship within the NBA is what's buying him grace. I think a similar thing can be said for Jonathan Isaac, truthfully. I don't think he's worth $15 million either, but I think his veteranship within the NBA, and specifically his relationship within the Orlando Magic organization, is the only reason he's even still on this team. Because $14 to $15 million for a guy who only played, 8 to 9 minutes the other day? Noah Pinta started and played 30-plus minutes. The rookie I've been clamoring for to get more minutes practically since the very beginning of the season. The rookie I've been clamoring for since the beginning of the year, that I think he was going to play himself into being the lead backup power forward off the bench over Jonathan Isaac. The lead backup small ball center over Jonathan Isaac off the bench. It's time. I don't know who's going to take the contract. I don't know who needs a nasty salary bad enough to take on Jonathan Isaac. But if the Orlando Magic can get anything out of a Jonathan Isaac trade, they need to rush that man to the airport themselves. Noah Pinda is ready. Noah Pinda is an archetype that is built with a forward thinking view of what this team is trying to be a year, 2 years from now, as far as versatility, the ability to play up and down the floor in transition, big jumbo wing ball handling. These are all things they've been building towards for years. And Noah Pinda fits that archetype better than Jonathan Isaac, has played better than Jonathan Isaac, has been more impactful in the minutes that he has played over Jonathan Isaac. And the minutes distribution between Noah Pinda and Jonathan Isaac throughout this season suggests that even the coaching staff believe that Noah Pinda is a better option. Don't even get me started on the fact that I feel like there's also an underlying aspect of all of this that just states that Jonathan Isaac is being deliberately protected by the Orlando Magic because they know how injury prone he is. And the worst part about a decision like that is we don't know if it's helping or hurting his trade value. The man's playing single-digit minutes per game, making $15 million a year. When Bradley Beal, and this is a weird example, but this is going to make the point of what I'm trying to illustrate, which is all about value. When Bradley Beal was a $40 million a year player, $35 to $40 million a year player, producing the way he was on the Suns next to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, everyone called him overpaid and overrated. And then as soon as he was waived and stretched and brought into the LA Clippers, before he obviously ended up going down with a season-ending injury, the viewpoint around the idea of bringing Bradley Beal had a much lighter tone of voice connected to it. Many felt a lot better about the idea of Bradley Beal on a $15 million a year contract as opposed to $35 to $40 million, despite the fact that if you looked at the statistics, the productivity was relatively equal. The productivity in the short time that Bradley Beal did play, in comparison to what he was able to give the Phoenix Suns in that scenario, were fairly equal. Yet his view from the national media, from others like you and me, was that the deal that he was on was what tanked the true viewpoint of what kind of player he really is, or really was. Jonathan Isaac is in a very similar situation where maybe for $15 million, I just can't take him seriously with the way he functions within this roster. Maybe if he made Tyus Jones money, right? $7 million. Maybe I wouldn't feel so offended as an Orlando Magic fan that he occupies a very lucrative amount of capital on this roster while barely playing. Noah Pinda, to me, is the answer long term at the power forward / small ball center position. His synergy next to Goga Batazde and Paulo Banchero in that front court in the game against New Orleans was very much a glaring thing for me, and glaring in a positive way, that I think Noah Pinda deserves to play more, and I think he's only further solidifying himself as ahead in the pecking order in comparison to Jonathan Isaac. For me, with Jonathan Isaac, I'll summarize it in this way. It's not a if Jonathan Isaac gets moved. It's a win, not a if. Because Noah Pinda is not only making it easier for the Orlando Magic to look past Jonathan Isaac in the time that he's on the floor isn't making it that much easier to plead a case in his favor. We talk about him from a theoretical standpoint of what he can be as a defensive player. We talk about the fact that he deals with injuries on and off, but he's been like that practically since he was drafted. So if you're injury prone, where when we play you heavy minutes, we're scared about what it can mean, or we play you in limited minutes, which limits your overall productivity, paired with the fact that even regardless of giving you time on the floor, you're only but so impactful in those short time frames, which is understandable because guys got to heat up and so on and so forth. But let's be honest. The Orlando Magic don't know what to do with Jonathan Isaac. That's why he plays just enough to not get hurt, but finds himself on a coach's DNP, CD situation, because they also have to protect him, because as a lucrative asset like $15 million on a roster that owes so much money already to 4 players, he is somebody that you now cannot necessarily dangle out because he's not a positive contract, but you want healthy enough for somebody to be willing to hopefully consider the idea of bringing him on their roster with hopes that they can maximize his usefulness. But me personally, I'm an Noah Penda guy. I've been that way since the start of the draft when they picked him up, and I'm not changing my mind anytime soon. I'm going to be honest with you. Fast breaks, buzzer beaters, and parties are back, and Underdog is the best place to get in on all the action. Playing on Underdog is easy. Just pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower on stats like rebounds, points, steals, and more. Get your picks right, and you could win up to $5,000 times your cash. You could win up to 5,000 times your cash. This week on Underdog, or today, I always have to adjust that. This week on Underdog, I am taking a look at probably the biggest matchup of the week, honestly. Oklahoma City Thunder are playing the San Antonio Spurs for, I believe, the 4th time this season. Tuesday night. And I'm going with both bigs. I'm going higher, Chet Holmgren, 26.5 points, rebounds, and assists. I think there's a world where Chet Holmgren messes around and get a double-double somewhere in this game. I think that he's going to positively respond. I think he's going to try his best to really be a pure menace on both sides of the floor in this one. And that might not mean that the Oklahoma City Thunder win. This San Antonio Spurs team has had their number this season. But I think Chet Holmgren is going to rise to the occasion. I'm taking Chet Holmgren higher than 26.5 points, rebound, and assists. But for Victor Wembanyama, I'm going higher than 21.5 points. This is big game for Victor Wembanyama. Every time the San Antonio Spurs play the Oklahoma City Thunder, there's going to be a little bit more oomph behind it moving forward. I think this is going to be a big game for Victor Wembanyama. Download the app today and use promo code BASKETBALLFAN to score $75 in bonus entries when you play your first $5. Again, that's promo code BASKETBALLFAN. Underdog, more picks, make picks, win money. Still working on it. But you guys are so helpful. Thank you so much. Not just the Underdog, but thank you to you guys for being such good supporters. It's been a big part of how we've been able to make these changes and be able to get opportunities like this one. So as I learn, you guys learn. We put parlays together. Higher or lower, man. Again, promo code BASKETBALLFAN for $75 in bonus entries. Next up, we're going to respond to some comments from last episode. Not too many, but a couple enough for me to feel like I want to, go back and forth with some of the things you guys had to say. Plus, I did ask you guys at the end of last episode, what were your thoughts on the Jamal Mosley hot seat scale? So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. So first off, shout out to Berto the Magician. He says, as I said before, this team needs to have a sense of direction on both ends. I do believe a coaching change is needed. I hope I am wrong. I do not think we need to trade for a missing piece. We have the pieces. The stereotype solution is always the coach, but this time it's an actual reality if we do not flip a switch going into the second half of the season. I totally agree with you from that perspective because I feel like there's a point where you can't keep pointing to personnel as part of the problem, especially when you're at the tax bracket that the Orlando Magic currently are in. It's not like there's too many more moves they can make on the margins. They've paid everybody they can pay. The talent that they've had and been able to acquire, whether it be through the draft and further on, has really sufficed in a real way. At the end of the day, Paulo Banchero is a one-time All-Star. At the end of the day, Franz Wagner, like when healthy, is an All-Star caliber player. Wendell Carter Jr. is a top 15 center in the league. Um, Anthony Black is arguably a top 5 most improved player candidate this season. Jalen Suggs, when healthy, is still one of the best point of attack defenders at the point guard position that there is in the NBA. Like, when you go down the list, the Orlando Magic have invested the proper pick value and finances to get the right kind of production from their roster. It just comes a point where you have to ask yourself whether or not the person calling the shots is still worthy of the title that they have. I do think Jamal Mosley is in a bit of an interesting situation here. Bolonga84 says, my thought is we hired Mosley when we were a lower level team and the goal was to get us to the next level. He's done that, but I feel if we want to win a championship, we need someone with a high level experience. I think we need a big name coach. I like Mosley and I think he's done a great job, but the offense is just too hard to watch. Always ISO with zero creativity and we need an X and O guy. So that's the tricky part. Because a lot of X's and O's guys are not necessarily big names from the perspective of like what we know in the past, right? Like a Tom Thibodeau and Dwayne Case, like those guys, I wouldn't call them like X's and O's guys. They're very old school oriented guys. So I think when you're talking about wanting to get an X's and O's guy, we're looking at like an assistant coach with a little bit of a boy wonder background. Not necessarily saying they have to be a young coach when I say boy wonder, but boy wonder in the sense of they have a better understanding of the analytical driven world of basketball that we are in as opposed to just the baseline interpersonal relationships and things of that nature that a coach needs in the olden times to forge, things like strong chemistry and so on and so forth. Like, yes, those things are important, but if we're talking about just straight execution on the floor, that's where you get an interesting name. Like, look at like what Darko Ragnarov, I don't want to say his last name and mess it up, but Darko for the Toronto Raptors, right? For example, not necessarily the most youthful coach, but the way he's able to get his guys to play so hard while also putting them in really good positions to score the basketball at a pretty decent clip and play really well on both sides of the end. Grant, don't get me wrong, they are a much better defensive team than they are offensive, but they've been able to maximize what they have offensively, especially given their deficiencies as a three-point shooting team. Ironically, Darko is like the kind of coach that the Orlando Magic need because they need a coach that can do something very similar because the deficiencies for the Toronto Raptors are very similar to those of the Orlando Magic. So I totally agree with you on that one. We are in the Orlando Magic version of the Mark Jackson to Steve Kerr baton pass. Like we are at that point in the Orlando Magic quote unquote rebuild that we definitely have to at least look at the idea of maybe getting a different perspective. Because, again, like you mentioned before, the idea of Jamal Mosley was very good when we were focusing strictly on the idea of him being a developmental coach because he did that. Every single season, this team got better defensively. Every single season, it felt like this team progressed better and better as far as trying to get into the postseason and become, quote-unquote, perennial postseason team. Now we're at the point where you're taking a step beyond just being a perennial postseason team and like actually being a threat. It's one thing to get there. It's another thing to actually make some noise. And I think the Orlando Magic are at the point where they need to get in that conversation of actually worthy of making some noise or actually believing they can make some noise in the postseason. And you do have to wonder if Coach Mosley is the guy to instill that in them. Next up, Tank Top Mijo. Or Tank Top Miho. Excuse me. As annoying as it will sound, injuries have caused us issues yet again. My main thought about this team is if Anthony Black can keep up this level of play, we need to strongly consider starting him over Suggs long term. You said the scary thing out loud that a lot of people are not willing to say, Tank Top. There's a reality where that has to be a conversation. Now, don't get me wrong. The price tag, this goes back to the whole price tag value thing I mentioned when talking about Jonathan Isaac. If you feel the need to start Anthony Black over Jalen Suggs, given the price tag that Jalen Suggs is on, it will be very hard to convey to ownership, even the GM, that Jalen Suggs is worth the money he is being paid if he is coming off the bench. Because then that creates a completely different numerical value for what a bench player is worth if Jalen Suggs plays 23 minutes off the bench, making 20 plus million a year. So financially and from an optics perspective, that's very difficult to do. Essentially, if you're suggesting the idea of Anthony Black starting over Jalen Suggs, you're essentially suggesting that Jalen Suggs has to be traded. Because the truth of the matter is there's no way they're going to be able to bring Jalen Suggs off the bench as a permanent move. You can masquerade it as a decision made to protect him from himself during a season in which he's dealing with the injuries actively and you're having to be cognizant of them. But to pull something similar to like what's being done with Jonathan Isaac, where that feels like there's a true deliberation to keep him out of harm's way by playing him in limited minutes or keeping him out of games to protect his injury risk or to protect his overall trade value because of his injury risk. You can't play that same game with Jalen Suggs as a long-term decision when he makes the money he makes. Suggesting the idea of moving on from Jalen Suggs, I think is more realistic. The idea of benching him in favor of Anthony Black, that one sounds a lot more difficult. And although I think, again, as I mentioned at the top, I think you said the quiet part or the scary part out loud about the idea that if Anthony Black just is that good, they may need to divert that resource of Jalen Suggs somewhere else to get something that can be of true value to them as a steady constant. I don't love the idea of trading Jalen Suggs. I've said this before. But at the same time, value is value based off of what you bring to the table. And the truth of the matter is that Jalen Suggs struggles to play 65 plus games a year. And a lot of what he brings archetypally is very similar to Jonathan Isaac is starting to become more and more theoretical because the value in which we weigh what we've seen from him versus how much we've seen him is starting to get into a point where the amount of how much we've seen him is so little in comparison to what you need to feel confident about him as a long-term option at the point guard spot. Luis Rosario 9522 says that we have home court advantage as a 4 seed. It's only good for the first round because the rest of the playoffs we will be on the road unless we bet someone on their floor, unless we beat somebody on their floor and flip the advantage our way. You're totally right. You're totally right, by the way. I mean, obviously that's the dice you roll with, but I think that's the truth of the matter is I do think this is a second round and out team with the way things are right now. But I think we're at the point with the Orlando Magic where like getting out of the first round is considered a successful season because of where they've been. I do think there's a trade incoming. I do think there's something that has to be said about what Jamal Mosley has or has not done this season with this team, injuries included. And so I do think that changes are going to be made regardless, whether it's this season or this summer. But the question is the urgency around how severe those decisions are will be hammered from their productivity or really their success in the postseason. If the Orlando Magic flame out in the first round, Jamal Mosley is getting fired the next day, in my personal opinion. I'm not saying that's what should happen. I'm saying that's what I believe will happen if they were to lose in the first round. I don't care if they were to lose in 7 games. That's the reality the Orlando Magic may face, is that if they fall out in the first round, the only guy they'll be able to point the finger at, unless there's a complete meltdown by Franz Wagner or Paulo Banchero, will be the coach. And even if there's a meltdown, Paulo Banchero's rookie contract extension kicks in next season. He's safe. Franz Wagner has a lot of money allocated to him. He's safe. Also, by the way, big wings with ball handling skill don't grow on trees. We see what Jaylen Brown's doing right now. He's turned into a top 3 MVP candidate like this year. Do you really want to get rid of Franz Wagner, who's a guy who, when he's healthy, has been your best player during certain stretches of not just this season, but in the past in general? You can't feel as confident about that. Like, maybe Jalen Suggs is relatively easier to move off of from a connection standpoint, but again, his equity within the franchise as the quote unquote heart and soul, the heartbeat of the team. Another guy might be very difficult to just move on from if the first domino of the coach is off the table. But I don't believe it's off the table. So when you talk about home court advantage, it really is about just getting out of the first round. If the Orlando Magic can get out of the first round and be competitive in the second round, I think the Orlando Magic brass up top would say this was a successful season. Because at least they took a stride forward after making a very dynamic move. Again, making the first trade of the 2025 summer. Or 2025 summer by landing Desmond Bane. That's the truth. That's the truth. Next up, Gooba1015 says, how come you don't respond to your audience on YouTube? I'm not going to lie, I saw this when I first was looking into the comment section to think about how I wanted to go about this segment. And I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. I've definitely went through the last 3 or 4 videos to see like if you've dropped comments before and like I haven't seen your name before. So if I missed your name in the past, I completely apologize. Otherwise, like if you go through my last like 2 to 3 weeks worth of content, I have had a comment section reply segment dedicated to a podcast episode at least 2 or 3 times within a week over the course of the last month. Like I've done comment section responses multiple times in the same week. So I'm actually very active as far as responding to the audience, and apologies if there's an older comment from you that maybe I missed or something of that nature. But I do want to address that because that's something that is very important. If you guys feel like I'm not responding to comments enough, that's a totally separate thing. Again, I've even had episodes dedicated to just responding to the comment section for the entire episode. So I'm more than open to that. But if I'm not mistaken, I did look back to check your username in particular to see if there was any time that you may have dropped a comment, and I didn't see any, and I definitely haven't seen any recent episodes. So if you have a question, though, please drop it in the comment section down below. And last up, Berto Magician had one more thing that says, hey, brother, I'd rate Coach Mo at a 7, progressively slowly towards a 10. Mike Malone, Denver's one coach with most wins, delivered a chip, was fired because of dispute with the front office on who to play on the roster. Boston Celtics had Brad Stevens, who wasn't fired but became the GM. Got Ime Udoka, then Joe Mazzulla. Knicks, who are my favorites to come out of the East, had Tibbs and knew he can only take them a certain level, so they get Mike Brown. I think this is what your way of essentially saying we've seen a handful of coaches just within the last year or so that have run their race and have, in a sense, also proven that success does truly have a timeline on it. You are not allowed to succeed minimally for 10 years in the same league that you can watch another team be very successful in 2 years. A very great example of this, I think, personally, and I'm going to use a college football analogy here. So for those who are not as familiar, close your ears or lock in because college football actually is pretty dope. But Kurt Cignetti, at Indiana with the Hoosiers, they're about to play for a national championship against against Miami. And Kurt Cignetti has been the Indiana Hoosiers coach for the last 2 years. Remember, for all those who don't know much about football or basketball or college in general, as far as collegiate sports, Indiana's more of a basketball school. He came to a basketball school, turned their joke of a football program around in 2 years and had them in the college football playoff the back-to-back years. And now he's putting a lot of other people around the country's jobs in jeopardy because he's been able to turn a program around in the NIL era in 2 years in ways that some teams, some players, some coaches have not been able to impact their teams with less time. With more time, excuse me. So sometimes tenure can't buy you everything. And although Mosley has been very helpful and has been a key part to this Orlando Magic team getting back to some semblance of relevance, he might have hit a wall. He might have hit the ceiling of whatever it is that he can bring to this team as a coach. I'm not willing to give up on him just yet, but I can't blame those who are already ready to kick the can, because there are definitely some gleaming issues here. The question is, how urgent do the Orlando Magic brass up top feel it is to get that new voice in the locker room? That's a huge, huge question. Speaking of huge questions, we're going to end the podcast off really with a very general question to you guys. Is I haven't done the NBA Dream Trade Deadline candidates segment in the last few episodes, and it's because I just haven't been able to come up with too many more names that I think are both realistic and interesting that we haven't already discussed on the podcast. So I really appreciate it if you guys could come up with some other names that might be really interesting dream candidates. And again, they don't necessarily have to be like budget ballers. Remember, with Jonathan Isaac, that's $15 million paired with Jalen Suggs, that's $25 to $30 million a year. If you look at the circumstance, I don't think Jalen Suggs makes 20. I don't think he makes 30 million. I think he's somewhere between 23 and 27 million, actually escalating. But nonetheless, that you're talking about over $40 million in contract salary right there between Jalen Suggs and Jonathan Isaac, paired with the fact that you could put in someone like a Jet Howard as a young piece that's also an expiring contract. Like, they can muster up up to $50 million if they're truly willing to part ways with someone like a Jalen Suggs to actually upgrade the team. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say, because again, I'm not saying these trades necessarily have to be realistic to the point of like the Orlando Magic would definitely do this. They're dream candidates because they're players that you would want to see on the team based off the financial infrastructure this team has. And although they don't have a lot of leverage to make an on-the-margin move to get some kind of budget player for practically nothing, they do have the salary on their roster to move a name or two with big salary attached to them to go after a more significant name. Right? Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan. The Ja Morant thing is so interesting because of the fact that we just saw that Trae Young got traded to the Washington Wizards, and the Atlanta Hawks didn't even get a first round pick out of it, which completely changes the dynamic around trading for a star point guard. Now, granted, the difference is that Trae Young has the chance to become an unrestricted free agent this summer if he decides to drop his player option. It sounds like all news is pointing towards the fact that he probably will pick up the player option and play with the team in hopes of signing a contract extension after a couple of games or a couple of months into that season, with a chance to get an understanding of the team that he practically chose to go to. But I mean, the Trae Young trade alone shows you don't need much to be able to land a significant name in today's NBA, because the value of these different players and the value of these different archetypes really do change your viewpoint on how much they are worth. Trae Young is a multi-time All-Star that got the Atlanta Hawks to a conference finals, and a first-round pick wasn't even attached. He got traded for 2 expiring salaries. So the Orlando Magic could probably do a lot more than I think even I've given them credit for throughout this year. So I'm interested to hear about some dream trade deadline scenarios that you think would improve this Orlando Magic team in a real way, and maybe it involves sacrificing a big name on this team. But maybe that also might be what this team needs. A drastic shakeup that involves bringing another big name in that really brings some true value to the team that they don't already have on the roster. So I'm interested to see what names you guys drop in the comment section down below. With all that being said, this has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And shout out again to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring the vid. I will see you guys tomorrow. Until then,